In the secluded, mist-laden hills of New England, Thornwood Manor loomed like a haunting secret. Abandoned for over 80 years, its shadow stretched across the land, its dark windows like hollow eyes that stared into the empty countryside. No one visited Thornwood, not since the last Ashford family member vanished in 1941. Some said the place was cursed, others whispered that the manor was alive, hungry for souls. Eleanor Fitzpatrick, a historian with a fascination for uncovering dark secrets, found herself drawn to the mysterious manor. After months of research and tracing the peculiar history of the Ashford family, she was ready to explore it herself. She drove up the winding road, her car headlights slicing through the thick evening fog. The iron gates at the entrance to Thornwood were rusted and entangled with vines, but as if compelled by some unseen force, they gave way with a screech. When she reached the front steps, Eleanor hesitated, feeling an inexplicable heaviness in her chest, a sensation almost like fear. She shook it off, telling herself it was just her nerves. But as she entered the house, that feeling only grew. The silence inside was so deep, so unnatural, that she could almost hear her own heart beating. The grand entrance hall was covered in a fine layer of dust, its cracked marble floor echoing her cautious steps. An old chandelier hung above, its crystals dull and covered in cobwebs. Faded portraits of the Ashford family lined the walls, their eyes following her as if they were more than just paintings. She shivered, almost feeling them watching her, waiting. Eleanor moved slowly, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. She found relics of a life long lost, a child's doll, its face cracked and eyes eerily glassy, a grand piano with broken keys, seeming to wait in silence for hands that would never play it again. But it was the covered mirrors that disturbed her most. Every mirror she came across was draped in cloth or turned to face the wall, as if hiding something they didn't want seen. The faintest of sounds began to prick her ears, barely audible at first, like the creak of old wood settling, or perhaps footsteps. Eleanor paused, straining to listen, but there was only silence. Yet, the sense of being watched crept back, crawling up her spine. Eventually, she reached the library. Dust-covered books filled the shelves from floor to ceiling. But one book lay out of place on an old desk, open to a brittle, yellowed page. Her curiosity got the best of her, and she approached to read it. It was the diary of Alice Ashford, the last known member of the Ashford family. Her heart pounded as she read. They don't know. They think it's the house that haunts us, but they don't see the truth. It's something inside, something buried within these walls, watching us, waiting for us to remember. I hear them every night, scratching, moving, shifting in the walls. Father says I'm mad, but I know. I know they're there. Eleanor's skin prickled with dread. She slammed the diary shut, her hands shaking. But just then, she heard a low, rumbling sound, like the groan of something old and heavy shifting in the walls. Her breath hitched. She turned her flashlight toward the wall, and in the glow, she saw the wallpaper subtly rippling, as though something alive was moving beneath it. Desperation seized her, and she backed out of the room, only to find herself staring into the dark hallway beyond. At the end of the hall, there was a door she hadn't noticed before. It was large and heavy, with bolts and chains securing it in place. As she approached, she could feel a chill emanating from it, an icy draft that made her shudder. Her hand trembled as she reached out, pulling at the chains, which gave way with surprising ease. She wrenched the door open, revealing a narrow, winding staircase descending into darkness. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic, something like blood. She hesitated, but something compelled her to move forward. The staircase was steep and seemed to go on forever, spiraling down into the unknown. Finally, she reached the bottom, where a hidden room lay beneath the house. It was an old asylum, a hidden chamber filled with rows of beds strapped with heavy iron cuffs. In the center of the room, an operating table gleamed dully in her flashlight beam, stained with dark spots she dared not inspect too closely. The walls here were lined with bricks scratched with strange marks, deep grooves as though someone, or something, had clawed at them from within. Eleanor could barely breathe, her heart pounding so hard she feared it would give her away. But then, she saw them, faint, shadowy figures lurking at the edges of her light, just out of reach, like dark stains moving on the walls. One figure began to take shape, a gaunt, ghostly apparition with hollow, haunting eyes, staring at her with a look of pure, unending sorrow. It raised an arm, pointing to the wall beside her, where a chilling message was carved into the bricks, "Do not forget us." Just as she registered the words, the sound of chains dragging against stone filled the room. Eleanor turned, her heart leaping into her throat as she saw the other figures lurching toward her. They were shadows, but not insubstantial. She could feel their presence, cold and angry. The figures whispered not with words, but with an overwhelming, oppressive silence that filled her with a fear deeper than she'd ever known. Panicked, Eleanor bolted back up the stairs, her flashlight bouncing wildly as she scrambled to escape. But the shadows seemed to follow, stretching across the walls, reaching out with spectral hands. She could feel them close behind her, feel their anger and sorrow pressing in on her like a weight. As she reached the top of the stairs, Eleanor threw herself through the hallway, out the door, and into the open air. She didn't stop running until she was outside, gasping for breath, the cold night air a relief against her flushed skin. When she looked back at the manor, she thought she saw the faint outline of figures in the windows, watching her with hollow, unseeing eyes. That night, Eleanor left Thornwood Manor, but its shadows followed her. She never spoke of what she saw there, yet she could never escape the feeling of being watched. In her dreams, she would sometimes return to that hidden room, hear the dragging chains, and feel the sorrowful eyes of the forgotten upon her. And to this day, the townsfolk say that if you pass by Thornwood Manor on a cold, quiet night, you can sometimes see shadows moving in the windows, as though reaching out for someone to remember them, someone to finally set them free.